Hey everyone, it's Kenny. Today we're going to deep dive a new feature from Anthropic, Claude Agent Skills, and I specifically didn't make this video right away because I wanted to spend some time using skills, creating my own and really testing them so I understood their purpose before shooting the video. I'm going to be breaking down what skills are, why they're important, how they're different from slash commands and MCPs and the rest of the current ecosystem, and then finally how you can build your own and really optimize them to start solving your real problems today. So whether you're technical or not, no worries. I'm going to show you how to use skills both in the Claude app as well as in Claude Code. And fun fact, the title and thumbnail for this video were actually generated by my personal assistant agent who is using a custom skill that I built. So stick around until the end where I'm going to bring everything together with a live demo of my personal assistant using this skill that I made to solve a very real problem of mine. Now, I've been pretty sick for the last couple of days, which is why I have my camera off today. So apologies if I'm not as clear on the mic. I'm super congested, but anyway, let's get into it. All right, let's start with what Claude Agent Skills are. And I'm going to be flipping through a lot of different sources. So I put together this kind of cheat sheet or overall notes just for my understanding. And if this is something that you might find useful, where I do the full comparison and breakdown against other things like MCPs, subagents, etc., as well as how to create your own custom skills and how to optimize them. But most importantly, all of the sources that I'm pulling information from at the bottom, I'll be sharing this note in the description so you can go ahead and read through it on your own time. And just for fun, to talk about what skills are, I fed that entire note to Claude and asked it to use the PowerPoint skill to generate this presentation. So we're gonna see how good this skill is. I think it's not bad, but definitely could be improved in the graphics area a bit. So to really understand what skills are and why they're useful, I think it helps to start with the current challenge that skills are trying to fix. Now, the way things currently work is you typically load all tool schemas, whether they're local tools or from MCP servers, into the system prompt. And we do this because we want to give our agent all of these different capabilities because that's ultimately what makes them so useful, right? So you want your agent to be able to browse the web, scrape data, interact with our local file system, run bash commands, and also connect to MCPs for Google Drive, Calendar, Notion, Slack, etc. So you want all of these, and up until now, you had to load all of the directions and documentation for those functionalities into the system prompt. But this is, of course, very token inefficient because at any given moment for the particular task at hand, you might use only a few tools, or let's say, for example, less than 10% of the tokens that you actually loaded for all of those tool definitions and usage instructions. So this is ultimately a context engineering problem. And this is the problem that skills are ultimately trying to solve. Conceptually, skills are actually really simple. It's just a folder. Like in this example, we have this my skill folder with a skill.md file in it. The rest of these files are optional. They're just additional context, but at a minimum, to create a skill, you need a folder with a skill.md file in it. If you want to give additional context, you can include other things. Like in this example, I'm showing a scripts folder where you might have some Python scripts or bash scripts that the agent can run. You could also have markdown files or text files with additional context, or even data in the form of CSV files, for example. Really, you can have any other kind of context you want to load in here. Now let's look at the anatomy of the skill.md file. This example is for a PDF skill, so working with PDFs. And for the skill.md file, it always has to have this structure. You have this YAML front matter, which is going to have a name and a description. And the description is really important because just like tool descriptions, it's what tells the agent what this skill is and when it should be using this skill. And then you have the body of the skill, which goes into a lot more detail and includes all of the instructions on how to actually use the skill to accomplish a task. But that's basically it. This skill.md file is all you need to create a skill. Now, the main design pattern for skills and what really makes them so powerful is this idea of progressive disclosure. When you give a skill to an agent, the only thing that's actually loaded into the system prompt is the name and the description. So basically the front matter or metadata that you saw in the skill.md file. If the agent decides to actually use the skill, then it will go ahead and read the rest of the body of that markdown file, which is going to include all of the additional context and instructions to actually use the skill. So this is really token efficient, and it's what makes skills particularly attractive compared to other things like MCPs, which, as we mentioned before, you have to fully load the context for into the system prompt. And if you think about it, it allows us to fit way more functionality into an agent than if you were only using tools or MCPs. For example, an MCP might have 20 tools, and maybe those tools plus schemas and instructions take up, let's say, 3,000 tokens in the system prompt, whereas a skill that gives you the same functionality might only initially load 50 tokens in the system prompt with just the name and description. And the rest of that context would be loaded later on as needed. But this idea isn't new or exclusive to skills. It's just context engineering, right? And I and others use the same approach to progressively disclose context to agents, like my personal assistant, which I built using the Claude Agent SDK. Don't worry, we'll see more of that in action later on when we build our own custom skill. But the point is that this progressive disclosure makes the agent way more token efficient. Let's talk about how skills compare to other current tools that we have, like slash commands, MCPs, etc. And here I'm really going to focus on these two, slash commands and MCPs, because I feel like they're the most similar and have the most overlap to skills. But in the note that I shared in the beginning, it'll be linked in the description, that has a more full breakdown comparing skills to subagents and projects, etc. So with slash commands, they're very similar to skills in that they have a predefined prompt detailing out a workflow for the agent to carry out. The main difference is that you have to trigger a slash command yourself, whereas with skills, they're used by the agent. So the agent is going to decide when to use it. And this really allows skills to be used more dynamically. So imagine you have a slash command that takes in additional input arguments besides just the prompt. So instead of you having to do work or research to figure out all of the information you need to pass as the input arguments to the slash command, the agent instead chooses when to use the slash command, but also what input arguments to use. So it would do all of that pre-work for you, calling whatever tools it needs to and gathering context. So by leveraging skills over slash commands, you ultimately offload more from yourself to the agent and give it more autonomy. Now, in terms of functionality, there's nothing that you can do with skills that you can't do with MCPs. In MCPs, you obviously have tools, but you also have resources, which are just like additional context or data that we have in the skills. And you also have prompts, which are just like the skill.md file. But ultimately, there's two key differences with MCPs. One is in the complexity. Implementing a skill is way more simple and straightforward since it doesn't involve standing up, the MCP server infrastructure, MCP clients, and ultimately it's just some markdown files, right, with potentially scripts. The second big difference is with progressive disclosure, which we just discussed. Claude is only going to see the name and description in the beginning, so the context load is minimal. And on this particular point, I'm actually not entirely sure why this is the case. Like, technically, we don't have to do this with MCPs. We could, for example, only tell Claude in the system prompt which MCPs are connected or available, and then whenever it wants to use a particular MCP, it could progressively disclose what tools are in it, and ultimately the tool docks as needed when it wants to call an actual tool. I've done that in the past with custom agents I've built. I don't understand why this isn't already implemented in Claude, this idea of progressive disclosure with MCPs. So if you have more clarity on that, if you have an idea why that is, then I'm really curious. Let me know in the comments what you think. So ultimately, I think that you get these 3 key benefits from using skills. One, which is huge, is the context engineering and efficiency of skills. The nice thing is that the Claude harness really takes care of how skills are used and the directions that go into the system prompt for leveraging skills. All of that's already taken care of, which really simplifies the whole process. And you get this really efficient system for loading context out of the box, really. And so that's one of the other key benefits, is also just how simple it is. It's ultimately just setting up some markdown files with instructions. And while it is simple to get started and implement simple skills, it is still very much powerful, and you can make skills more complex by, again, adding additional tools and scripts and bash commands that the agent can run to give it a lot more functionality. And then ultimately, I think you also get this ability to compound the agent's abilities. For example, by having skills leverage other existing skills. And I'll show you an example of that in a bit, where I have an Excel model builder that leverages the existing default Excel tool that Anthropic developed. So I think that's really cool because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just kind of piece different skills together and build new, more powerful skills that leverage other skills. Okay, to use skills in the Claude app, whether it's the desktop app like I have here or in the web app, it's exactly the same. You're just going to want to go to the settings, and I'm going to do that up here. So you want to go into settings and you want to go to capabilities. And if you scroll down, this is where you have the different settings for Claude's capabilities like memory, etc. And at the very bottom, you have a new section for skills. Here you can see it comes with a bunch out of the box. These are default skills that are developed by Anthropic and made available to you. Initially, these will all be off if you haven't used skills yet, but you can enable the ones that you want. Some useful ones, for example, are the skill creator skill, which allows you to just prompt Claude and have it build a skill for you. And this is basically like vibe coding a new skill, which can be very useful. You can see kind of the best practices for creating a skill that Anthropic themselves have coded. And you also have some other ones that are really useful, like for building MCPs and artifacts. Up here to the right, you can see that you can upload skills. And to upload a skill, you just have to upload a valid zip file with the skill folder. So this is the actual skill folder that I have here. You can see I have my skill.md in the root of the folder, and then I have a scripts directory with a couple of Python scripts. So I zipped this folder, so I have this zip folder now, and I can just drag and drop this zip file to upload it, and you'll see that the skill was uploaded successfully. Now remember, the skill.md file has to have the valid format with the YAML front matter, including the name and the description, otherwise this will error out. So now this skill should be loaded and available. So if I go to new chat, you can see I'm approaching my weekly limit here, just super annoying. But what are you going to do, you know? So I'm going to show you an example of using my cohort analysis skill. I have this CSV here with some transactions data that I want to build a cohort model with. And don't worry if you don't know what that means. It's a financial type of model that I want to build in Excel. And I've given it instructions in the skill on how to do this. So I'm just telling it to build a cohort model. Of course, there's so much that goes into that, so much context behind that ask. And this is all detailed in the skill file, right? So Claude is going to start by examining the file itself to understand the structure of the data set. And you can see right away from the context, it knows that it has this cohort analysis skill that is specific for this kind of task. So it's going to go ahead and read that skill and then use it to start building this cohort model. So we'll let this run for a bit. Okay, it looks like it just finished up, and it's got a summary for what it did here. We had almost 20,000 transactions in this data set from 1,000 customers. So this is not a small data set, and it's gone ahead and calculated all of these key metrics and built this cohort model for us. So let's see. I'm going to open this up in Google Drive so it's easier to see. All right, so here's the actual model. It's an Excel file, and I opened it in Google Sheets, which is a really nice feature of Google Sheets that you can open Excel files. But anyway, these columns in gray here, so this is the raw data. This is exactly what the input CSV looked like. And then it's gone ahead and added these 3 columns and then built out the model in this other tab. And we can see at the very top, we have a table where we can adjust some input assumptions into the model. And then you have all of these metrics that are laid out by cohort. So based on the first transaction date that a customer had, they've been grouped into these cohorts. And then we're tracking, for example, their retention rate over time. So here's my retention matrix. And if we scroll down, we have our customer counts, transaction counts, average transaction per customer, total revenue, etc., etc. And we should eventually get to the lifetime value of the customer, or LTV. So that's down here. And here is our CAC adjusted LTV. So if I just hide all of these rows here to look at the very last metric, we can see that all of the cells for the model are formula based, and it's not easy to write formulas that don't have any errors. So for this particular skill, in that scripts folder that we saw, there are these validation Python scripts that the agent will run, and that's all detailed in the skill instructions. So once it inserts all of the formulas into the model, it'll actually run a validation script to make sure that there's no formula errors, which is really nice. So just to make sure this works, we can change the input parameter here, let's say 20, and you can see all of the numbers here update. So this model does update live. So we can change this to, let's say 5%, and again, the model updates live. So this is super nice. It's literally, as a finance manager for an analytics team at a fintech company, like, I can tell you this is an insane amount of work that would go into actually creating this by hand. So the fact that you can program this in a skill like this and have it be so reliable is honestly really amazing to me. Now, I'm not going to go into the full anatomy of this particular skill. Instead, I want to now show you how to set this up in Claude Code with a different skill that I've made. And in that one, we'll break it down more so that we can see how the skill actually works. Okay, now I'm going to show you how you use skills in Claude Code. And it's actually the same thing if you have built a custom agent in the Claude Agent SDK. You would use skills in the exact same way. So here I have my project for my personal assistant agent. And I've got this .claude folder here. This is where you would normally load all of your subagents, your commands, etc. And all you have to do is add a new folder here called skills, and then you'll have a folder for each skill that you want. So we just saw the example for the cohort analysis. You can see at the root I have my skill.md and then the script. So this is the exact same skill. I just ended up zipping it and then using it in the web app or the desktop version of Claude. So that's the nice thing about skills, is their portability. I also have this Excel skill that was developed by Anthropic. This is one of their default skills, and they have a repo where they have all of their default skills, which I'll show you here. And this is also going to be linked in the resources in the note that I'm sharing in the description. So if you scroll down to document skills, and you can see they have a bunch of other ones. These should look familiar, like the skill creator. that we saw in the web app. But if you go to document skills, this is where they have the skills for working with PDFs, docs, PowerPoint, and Excel files. So you can go ahead and check out the anatomy of these here. And then finally, I have this third skill for creating YouTube thumbnails. So this is the one I want to walk you through in more detail so you can understand how it works and how you can design a really powerful skill yourself. So looking at the skill MD for this one, we have our name, and then we have a very detailed description saying what this skill is and specifically when this skill should be used. So here we're specifying that whenever the user asks to create a thumbnail from scratch or edit an existing thumbnail. And at the very top here, you'll see I've listed out a kind of table of contents for all of the relevant context for this skill. And when you have a more complex skill where you're loading additional context, this is really important because you want an organized location for the agent to quickly see where it needs to go for specific information. So you don't want to just list the files, you want to actually describe what's in them at a very high level so that the agent can decide at this point whether it needs to go and read that file, because it might not need to read it every time. So in this example, I'm specifying this required reading where the design requirements for every thumbnail is always the same. So the agent always needs to read the design requirements because this applies to every thumbnail that it's going to generate. And it also needs to read the prompting guidelines because it's using Nano Banana. I want it to read the best practices for prompting Nano Banana every single time. So this is laid out in the beginning in a very clear way that this is absolutely mandatory reading. But these other things, like here, I'm just specifying that we have these other assets, and you'll notice these locations aren't even in this skills folder. So you can actually point to context that is somewhere else in your system. Here, I'm saying that we have some icons, some headshots of me, some templates, and these are all optional assets that can be passed to Nano Banana to be used in creating thumbnails. And these will only be loaded as needed. So if we go look at one of these, like let's say the design requirements, if I click into the design requirements doc, this is all collapsed, but here we're gonna have very specific information. Like this is data I've pulled from my own lessons that I took on vidIQ for how to optimize thumbnails. And so I've laid it all out here. So the agent is gonna read this every single time. But for example, if we look at the thumbnail templates, so this file contains all of the templates that we have, which are kind of proven designs for thumbnails. And this is only going to be loaded if the agent decides that it wants to create a thumbnail from a template, because the agent could also decide to create a thumbnail from scratch. So it doesn't have to use templates. So in that case, it wouldn't actually load this file at all. And so that kind of shows you in practice this idea of progressive disclosure. So hopefully that gives you a practical example of how you can implement your own custom skill for solving a very particular problem that you have, like I did here. And I want to show you this in action. So now we're going to do this live demo. So I mentioned that this idea of progressive disclosure is really a problem of context engineering, and I'm using it specifically in this personal assistant. So I kind of wanted to show you how that works. In the beginning, when I start up my personal assistant, it's going to load the Claude.md file in this context directory. So this is a folder that I created in .claude. In here, I'm specifying how this context system works. I'm starting by telling it that there are these subsystems for memory, for projects, for tools inside of these subdirectories. And I'm telling it how to manage this context. I'm also telling it that it has to read these Claude.md files at the root of these subdirectories before doing anything else. And that's just to get it familiar with how the memory system works, how the project system works, how the tool system works. So if we click into one of these, for example, the projects, you can see I have these different projects here, and each of these folders is going to have a bunch of context on those particular projects. So for example, here is my YouTube project. And as the agent traverses these ClaudeMD files, it's going to get a little bit more context. So if I click into the project's ClaudeMD file here, you can see it lists out my projects and then gives a very brief description of what that project is. And then if I click into the ClaudeMD for my YouTube project, you have these different context files. I have a project overview markdown file and a YouTube Studio markdown file. And so the agent might decide it wants to know more about my YouTube project. And here I'm saying this has more information about my channel. So it might click into this project overview. And then it's going to get specific details and a lot more context about my YouTube project. So I encourage you, whether you're working with Claude or building your own agents, to always be thinking about the context engineering that you're putting into the system, because it really is a skill that you want to build for maximizing the context efficiency. Okay, so now let's actually see my YouTube thumbnail skill in action. In my YouTube folder, I have this episodes directory, and I just created this new research.md file for my new episode, which I'm currently filming for you guys right now. All I have in here is I went to YouTube and I searched Claude Skills, and I got these first 5 video results and put them into this markdown file. So I prepared this prompt, which I'm not going to do the voice activation right now because I'm trying to save my voice, but I'm just going to copy that in. And essentially, we're asking Claude to come up with some title and thumbnail ideas for my next YouTube video. And I'm specifying that it's going to be about Claude Skills, and also that I did this quick search and pointing it to that research doc so that it can look at the top 5 videos for examples. So we'll go ahead and kick that off. And you can see I am approaching my weekly limit, but this is definitely worth it for this video. So here you can see the context system working, where it's going in and checking its memories. It's looking at the projects directory, specifically the Claude.md. And now it's just calling a bunch of MCP tools from the YouTube Analytics MCP to get data on these specific videos. It looks like it's running a bunch of curl commands to get the thumbnails from these videos. Luckily, Claude is multimodal, so it can actually understand the thumbnails or images from these videos, which is really cool. And that's important because it's getting that context. I, of course, want it to generate high conversion, high click-through rate thumbnails / titles. And the fact that it can look at existing thumbnails and understand what the structure of them is and then apply those design patterns to my suggestions is really cool. Okay, so let's scroll up and then see what the output here was. So it looks like it analyzed the competition and it's got some suggestions here. So option 1, the unfair advantage angle. Claude Skills changed my workflow forever. Here's how. That's pretty clicky. That's pretty clicky. Option 2, complete system angle. The only Claude Skills guide you need from 0 to expert. I like this one too. And then you can see it's got a short thumbnail concept. This isn't the full prompt, but it's got the idea for the thumbnail paired with the title. And again, that skill for actually generating the thumbnails, it's going to have a lot more detail into how it should actually generate the prompt and the best practices to apply in the prompting. But you can see it's not doing that yet, right? It's just kind of detailing the concept. It's only going to fully implement all of the best practices for the prompt once it calls that skill. So I like option 2. This one is I automated my entire workflow with Claude Skills. Claude Skills versus MCPs versus Subagents, what you actually need to know. I built 5 Claude Skills. So I think I like option 2 the most. This one doesn't make sense because it's no code required, whereas we are diving into code here. Claude Skills change. So I like options 1 and 2 the most. So I'm just going to say, would you like me to create a document with these concepts saved? I like options 1 and 2. Can you add them to the research doc and then create the thumbnails? And I'm really praying that we don't hit that limit before we're done with this demo. So now it's going to go ahead and edit the research doc and add the 2 concepts that we're going to go forward with. Okay, so this is cool. Now you can see that it's using the skill, and now it knows because of the skill that we have these templates. So it's looking at what templates we have. And now it is creating the 2 thumbnails. So it's calling Gemini in the bash command. So it looks like this is the prompt for the first option. So we'll go ahead and say, yes, run it. And that's a really cool thing about skills, because Claude Code can just run terminal commands. It can actually invoke the Gemini CLI, and so it can run that agent, which is connected to the Nano Banana MCP server already, and then generate the thumbnails through Gemini. Don't run out of limit. Okay, so it's done now. So it's created the thumbnails and updated the research document, and then it's got the file locations here. So let's check out the research doc first. Okay, key insights from the competitor analysis. So here's option 1 and here's option 2. So these were the concepts. And then normally I would tell it to actually add the file locations to the research doc so that we have everything in one place, but I'm just going to scroll up and copy paste these in order to save my usage. So I'm going to copy that, and then I can open a new terminal. So this is going to be option 1 and say open. Okay, execute that. Okay, so this is option 1. Honestly, it's not the best, but it can definitely be edited to be better. And so I'm still playing around with the actual prompting for Nano Banana to get it to create much better thumbnails. And I've seen way better than this. Honestly, this is probably one of the worst ones I've seen it create so far. So I'll show you some examples in a bit, but let's take a look at the second one. So, okay, so this one's a lot better. Complete guide, 0 on the left to expert on the right with I feel like the Claude Skills isn't really emphasized enough, but you can see how we're getting there. Like, that's not a bad thumbnail. It just needs some tweaks, and so we could go back and forth with Claude to optimize it. So this is a pretty good starting point, I'd say. And just to show you that it's not complete garbage, it doesn't always miss. I'm going to show you some other thumbnails that it's created before, which really were not bad. So here's some examples of ones that it previously created, and they're not all good, but honestly, they're not all bad. Like, this one isn't bad. It's a good starting point. Obviously, it has an Asian guy that is not me, but besides that, this design idea is pretty good. So I could do like a face swap on that. This one I thought was pretty good too. This idea of like this split before and after, and then just really simply with Agent SDK pointing to the right. You have these that are also similar concept of before and after, and I really like them. Here's a pretty good one. Human override, that's for human in the loop. And then you do have some that I think it thinks are a good idea, but actually aren't, because it doesn't make a ton of sense when you first look at it. But then when you see the explanation, like the thinking behind it, it actually does make sense how it was thinking. It just doesn't really translate to like the visual piece. But yeah, you have some that are honestly not bad. So hopefully that gives you a much more hands-on view and idea of how skills work, how you can use them both in the web app as well as in Claude Code. And like I said, if you just create the skills directory in this .claude folder, that's going to work with both Claude Code and any agents that you've built and run here with the Claude Agent SDK. And one final tip, if you are creating your own custom skill, either creating it using Claude's skill creator skill or just doing it yourself, there will definitely be times when the skill is not going to be behaving exactly how you want it to. And just like anything else that you vibe code, you can improve it over time by just prompting your agent. So what's worked for me is telling Claude Code or Cursor or whatever you're using that the skill failed because of X reason, and showing it what the expected output was versus what happened, and then having it review the full skill and identifying what it thinks the failure point was, and then suggesting to you how to improve it, and then going ahead and implementing that fix. So you can iteratively improve the skill and get it closer to what your expected output is, just like anything else you vibe code. If you want to see a full breakdown and even more detail of how I'm using skills like this for the YouTube thumbnail and also generating finance models, I'm going to be breaking that down in my next video, where I'm going to deep dive my personal assistant that I've built to help me with my everyday work. And I'm really excited for that video. So definitely make sure to subscribe if you're new here, and check out my previous video if you want to learn how to build your own personal assistant or agent using the Claude Agent SDK. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions about skills or something I didn't cover in the video, make sure to drop them in the comments and I will be sure to respond. See you in the next video.